Hi there. I'm Nicole from the Law Offices of Jacob Aronauer.
And I'm Sean Ricketts from the Law Offices of Jacob Aronauer.
So today this video is about domestic workers. However, because it's such a broad term, we will talk about the type of domestic workers these laws apply to. But we do want to first emphasize how important the employee's immigration status does not matter, okay? So now that that's covered, we also want to mention how domestic workers that are employed by agencies, that work for relatives, work part-time or casually, such as occasional babysitters or yard workers, does not apply to this video. I'm so sorry, guys. But if you do have questions about those, please don't hesitate to let us know through the chat box below. Now, this video applies to domestic workers who work with private individuals, employed in homes or residents to care for a child, serve as a companion for a sick, recuperating, or elderly person, housekeeping, or other domestic services, service purposes. Now, Sean here is going to tell us what requirements employers in New York City employing domestic workers under the New York State Domestic Workers Bill of Rights aren't commonly known, but should be.
So in New York City, employers of domestic workers are required to pay the New York City's minimum wage, which is now $15 an hour. You're required to be paid the minimum wage for all hours you work up to 40 hours. If you work more than 40 hours a week, you're required to be paid 1.5 times the minimum wage for those hours. So that would be $22.50 an hour. Domestic workers are also required to get 1 day off per week. So you can work Monday through Saturday and you need to have Sunday off. However, if you do work on Sunday, all of your hours that you work on that Sunday, on that 7th day, need to be paid at the overtime rate, regardless of if it's over 40 hours a week or not. All of those extra hours need to be paid at $22.50. That's really important. Domestic workers in New York are also required to get 3 paid days off from their employer after the employee has worked full-time for a year. So these laws are trying to protect people from doing what is a very difficult, very draining and tiring job, to make sure that they're paid properly and get some time off as they're doing this. Employers are also required to pay the employee weekly, and they're required to give employees a written notice of their pay rate and any deductions taken from their paychecks each week.
Well, thank you. I think the last bit about the written notice is something that people are aware of but are too scared to ask for. Do you have any suggestions on how they could go about asking their employer?
So you are required by law to get this notice, and the law also says that you are protected if you ask your employer any questions about your employment. So you are legally protected if you ask anything about your employment from your employer. So you shouldn't fear that. And if you are punished in any way, then that's considered retaliation, which is also illegal. So if you ask your employer, I need to have a written record of my wages and my hours worked, and they respond by cutting your hours or by firing you or by threatening you, then you should seek a lawyer and tell them that that's happening to you. That is not allowed under the law.
Would you agree, an employment lawyer in particular?
An employment lawyer in particular probably will be the best position to answer your questions, yes.
Perfect. Sean, I'd love to give you an example and you tell me how this person could seek help.
Great.
Okay, so recently we received a case about an immigrant nanny in New York City who worked about 42 hours in 1 week. It was a Monday to Sunday deal, and 10 a.m. to 5 p.m., so 7 hours a day, with 1 hour break per day. So it's only 2 hours out of the 40 hours a week. Is the employer obligated to pay overtime?
So this is what we are talking about with the obligation to give your employee 1 day off per week. And if you don't, you need to pay them overtime. So because this employee is working 7 days of the week, on the 7th day, they need to be paid at the overtime rate for all those hours. So if we're saying they worked 10 a.m. to 5 p.m., which is 7 hours, but they got an hour break that's unpaid. So they need to be paid for all those 6 hours they worked on that Sunday at the overtime rate, regardless of whether or not they worked more than 40 hours that week. So they should be paid, 6 of those hours should be paid at, if they're paid the minimum wage, $22.50 an hour.
Wow. You see, the more you know. So, I mean, from what we heard is that she was being paid $15 an hour. However, because of COVID or whatnot, they deducted her pay to $13 an hour. However, she was not notified. And when she was not notified, and then when she did confront her employer, she was fired. You did talk about retaliation. Would this fall under that category?
Yes, this is a perfect example of retaliation. It's also important to note that even during COVID, which we understand is a really difficult time for everyone, it is not allowed to pay your employee less than the minimum wage. So lowering her pay to $13 is in itself not illegal. Even if it were legal, even if she was still receiving above the minimum wage, you need to provide your employee a written notice. So that's also violating the law. And then if you talk to a lawyer and are punished by your employer for consulting a lawyer, that is the very definition of retaliation. And so that is another way in which that employer has broken the law.
Boy, was she glad that she came to us. So, well, that's really all of my questions. Do you have anything else to add on?
I would say that I understand that these rules seem very detailed and very tricky. The New York State Department of Labor has some good resources to consult, but if you are wondering and you have further questions about any of this, you should consult an employment lawyer and they can answer any questions you might have.
Well said, Sean. Thank you so much for your time. And again, I just want to emphasize once more that your immigration status does not matter. Okay? You have rights. All right. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you, Nicole.